Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here, as always, with Brendon. How are we going?
Good. Good to be home. It's been a little while since we recorded, a little bit over a month, but it's nice to be back, trying to catch up on life again.
Yeah, I mean, like I spoke to Leah from obviously from PHNX Sports, had a bit of a chat about the Coyotes in the meantime. So this for one episode became a very Coyote-centric podcast, which seems to have helped them, by the way. I'm going to claim full responsibility for the Coyotes being decent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all you. Like they were just so inspired by that interview that they just thought they'd put it together this year.
They spoke to me, and the next thing you know, vroom, through the roof. Anyway, we'll be having them back a little bit later on in the season, and thanks again to them for Leah for coming on. But we're back, and it's episode 199. We are almost at 200, and of course, it's Rick Dudley.
Yeah, that's of course. There's no other 99s of note that we need to mention.
It's all Rick Dudley. It's all Rick Dudley. By the way, the funny part about that is that Rick Dudley wearing 99, as we talked about when we talked about the Rebel League and the WHL and the WHA. Gretzky nearly ended up at Winnipeg. There was a move to try to get him to Winnipeg when the Indianapolis races fell over, and they just couldn't work. And that was where they basically Pocklington won him in the card game. So yeah,
honestly, the thing I like about 99 is that it's only 3 years into Gretzky's career that everyone else has decided yeah, no, he can have it. No one else no one else needs to be 99. Wolf Payment is the last person to wear 99 in 1982. Literally right after the start of Gretzky's career.
Yeah, nobody bothers. It's funny that nobody bothers. It's not even a case of other players wore it and then had to give it up.
Yeah, it was so obvious that no, we're just going to have to retire it for Gretzky 3 years in, just let him go.
Once Wilf Payment stops in 82, that's it. No one goes near it again. No one tries.
No one has since. Gretzky played his last year in 99, and then no one has touched it in 23 years.
Well, I mean, there's the rule now that you can't. But
yeah. I mean, obviously they did retire it, but I don't know exactly what year that was.
Well, that's the thing. It's an interesting thing. I think they retired it in 99. I think
that would make sense.
But I mean, look, we have talked about it often as well, and it does take guts to wear.
Yeah, after his final game,
yeah, it does take guts to wear some of these numbers, and I'd like to meet the person who's brassy enough to go, I can wear 99. I can do it. I can do that. That's easy. I've got this sorted.
We haven't really seen a similar one since. There's been players who have worn, there's been a few 87s. There's been a handful of 97s and stuff. There's been no one that's kind of been the standout one that everyone else is no, this guy's obviously a Hall of Famer. I'm not gonna touch it. There hasn't been a lot of 66s though, to be honest. In terms of Lemieux's number, that's maybe the next closest.
I mean, the interesting parable for this is obviously the fact that there are two fairly high profile 97s running around the league currently. It's McDavid and it's Kaprizov.
Do you remember the last person to wear 66?
No.
It was recently. It was 2018.
Oh God.
There was a little bit of a furor around it from some beat writers.
Oh, of course there was some furor. Yeah, that doesn't narrow it down when you go. There was a bit of furor from beat writers over it. It doesn't help.
He's currently, I think he's still playing. I think he's in the KHL.
Oh God.
Because no one else has wore it since Lemieux retired in 2006, the second time he retired.
It was it Mr. Alarm Clock himself?
Yes,
Josh Hosang.
Yes,
that's right. That's right because we talked about it. He wore it, and everyone went mental about.
Yeah, this was during the run of that podcast.
Yeah, this was right around the time when the alarm clock didn't go off.
Yeah. So it's it's not officially retired by the league, but it effectively has been. No one else has worn it in that entire. Oh no, actually, sorry, 2011. TJ Brody wore it very briefly.
That's what a double act that is. TJ Brody and Josh Hosang. That's, as I said, there takes there's a level of confidence or arrogance that I think you need to go, I could do that. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see, obviously you've got with Sidney Crosby, for example. I think that won't be a case in Pittsburgh. That'll be retired.
For sure. I mean, I think that they haven't retired a jersey number in Pittsburgh in a long time. I think since Lemieux, but I'm pretty sure that they will do Jager this year, from my understanding.
There was a conversation that's been going around.
I think we talked about that. But I would expect that probably Crosby and Malkin and probably.
I'm just taking. I did a quick check just before we move on. We are going to talk about what's happening currently, people, but this is fascinating. I just had a look at 87. There were 2 87s last year outside of Crosby.
Yeah.
And
no one of obvious importance, but
one of them was San Jose Shark legend Martin Kaut.
Yeah.
I'm staggered that there were other ones. Nobody who's ever, and this is I think something that speaks to hockey people. And we've talked about this a lot. There are jersey numbers out there that if you want to make a jersey number yours, there are numbers that you could take. Because what I think is really interesting is players that seem to know that they're very good don't go after the number of players that are already very good. And I think a lot of that has to do with making your own sort of, this is my number. I'm not piggybacking off a Bedard. I'm not in the future with Bedard. You've got obviously David now, you've got Crosby now, but I'm not going to piggyback off them. I'm going to have my own thing going. So let's have a start, because there were some things that happened. We're not going to go through everything that happened while Brendon was away. When Brendon went away, the San Jose Sharks were the worst team in hockey. Now they're only the second worst team in hockey, but a streaking second worst team in hockey. We'll talk about that.
Clearly I was cursing them or something.
You were the jinx. Anyway, so we'll start off with we have a trade to announce. I think you're going to want to hear it. Actually, it's not really important. So the Blackhawks acquired Anthony Beauvillier from the Canucks for a 2024 conditional 5th round pick. Now, we'll talk about why they suddenly have this cap space in a minute. But it's basically Taylor Hall's gone. He turned up to be, a Bedard winger, and that failed.
It's a bit unfortunate, I think, to have a season-ending injury so early on when he was pretty much the only one that was a certain thing to be stapled to Bedard's wing. Yeah,
basically. And obviously they had some experience there in the form of Corey Perry, but as we will get into shortly, that is no longer a thing, and probably no longer a thing in the league. Period. The Vancouver Canucks then also acquired Nikita Zadorov from Calgary for a 2024 5th round pick and a 2026 3rd round pick. That's after, obviously, they cleared the cap room by getting rid of Beauvillier. So, shuffling the decks a little bit there. The Zadorov one's interesting. We know that Calgary is going to clear house as we get towards the deadline. That's obvious. Zadorov was fascinating because he's been the one that they've been saying is not very popular in the locker room and seemed to be just not very popular within the organization. And they were looking forward to getting Zadorov out of the building. They didn't even vaguely try to hold out to get closer to the deadline for a bigger haul. They just went, go.
Yeah, apparently I think he'd asked for a trade a little while back. And I think it's an interesting kind of player because I think he has this reputation of being this physical defenseman, all this kind of stuff. But he's never really kind of made a massive impact anywhere to kind of meet up to people's expectations.
He's one of those players, and we see them a lot, where there's a lot of hype around what they can possibly do, but they never actually do it. I think the Dangle podcast mentioned one in recent dispatches where a beat writer, not even a beat writer, a online beat journalist, which is what a phrase that is, tried to link the Leafs to trading for a defenseman. And they connected dots and said, well, they might want Rasmus Ristolainen because he's got qualities that are playoff ready, to which everyone went, He's never played in the playoffs.
They've never played a single game in the playoffs.
Not even come close to playing a single game in the playoffs.
I mean, look,
That's a
the
guess.
amount of rope that being a 6'6" defenseman in the NHL gets you is nuts. Honestly, like these guys would have washed out 5 years ago if they were 5'10".
Yeah, there's a lot of like nearly men who have 10-year careers, 15-year careers because they're tall, and everyone's like, well, they must be decent at something, and it's let's keep going here.
If you're just okay and 6'6", you'll have a long NHL career as a defenseman.
And then the Sabres went out and acquired Eric Robertson from the Blue Jackets for a conditional 7th round pick.
That just happened today. So it's an interesting one because, like, obviously, I think that there was some hope for Robinson at some point in time that he was going to be, an impact forward for them. And it's kind of looked like he's ended up being like a fourth liner in that regard. Yeah, the condition is that if he plays 45 games this season, then they get the 7th round pick. Otherwise, nothing. So I think it's pretty much just kind of like who's willing to take on this 1.6 million for this fourth liner. Really, is the question.
It's an interesting thing as well for the Sabres to be like sort of starting the horse trade, because the Sabres have been deeply disappointing off the back of last season. Now, obviously, Tage Thompson's been injured. Although miraculously came back out of absolutely nowhere. But they've not performed anywhere near what you'd expect. They're currently behind the Habs in the standings, for example, and a bit behind as well. They're like, only the Senators are behind them in the Atlantic, another team that was supposed to be good and haven't been, although to be fair to the Senators, they've played 6 less games than the Sabres. Buffalo's just been a bit weird this year. Like, if everyone felt that Buffalo was the team, like we both, I think, had them decent predictions, and they're just not kicked on.
No, there's been a handful of teams, I think, that have been kind of, they were on an upswing towards the end of last season, and everyone's kind of looked at them as this expectation of like, oh, well, they're going to continue that trend. They're going to, come into this season and improve again. And I think there's been a handful of teams that just haven't had kind of the whole picture coming together. Like maybe there's been something missing, like, I was also really high on like New Jersey and Carolina and teams like that just kind of, have had, problems. Either they haven't had goaltending or they've had a bunch of injury woes or whatever. Like, maybe by the end of the year, some of these teams will put it together. But right now, there's a lot of teams that are just incomplete.
I mean, we'll get into this a little bit later on when we do our What's More Likely at the end of the episode, because we're doing What's More Likely this episode, and I'm looking forward to it. But there are a couple of teams I do want to bring up in terms of disappointing so far, and they are very high on my list, alongside teams like the Ducks, who were supposed to be at least a little bit better and have now gone from being a little bit better to really bad, like incredibly bad. Speaking of incredibly bad and incredibly weird, I'm going to sort of move into the bit of conversation that we need to get to. Corey Perry.
Yeah.
So Corey Perry's contract was terminated by the Chicago Blackhawks due to what they referred to as a workplace matter. Now, he's seeking help from mental health and substance abuse professionals in regards to his struggle with alcohol. He has now also entered the assistance program. Now, obviously, this was unfortunate for a number of reasons, the number one being the internet is undefeated at being trash.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, I think the way it played out really was that early on, like he was a healthy scratch a couple of times, and then they kind of just mentioned like, oh, he's away from the team. They kind of didn't really mention why or anything, and then all of a sudden it just kind of came out that like people just started speculating, people started guessing. I think there's a real danger with giving people just enough information for them to start speculating, but not enough to really kind of put them on some kind of track. But not that the Blackhawks are entirely to blame in this scenario, but in that couple of days before they really released anything of substance, like we got these awful rumors.
I think in this case, and it sounds weird, and everybody knows what I think of the organization. Like everybody knows what I think of the organization. I actually think the Blackhawks did it by the book.
Yeah, I think there was certainly legal ramifications.
So the Blackhawks, one of the things that I kept saying when people was firing back at people who were going with all the rumors, and I was going, no, that's first of all, that's absurd and horrible, and there are innocent people involved in that you really need to leave out of it. But one of the things that I was getting fired back at was, you can't trust the Blackhawks with their process. And my counter to that is, I think after everything else that happened, I think you can trust the Blackhawks deeply with this process because they can't afford to mess up again. They cannot afford to screw up a process. So what I think you got instead this time was the Blackhawks went, right, everybody close it down. We don't want anything getting out. Right, this is the process. We need to follow the guidelines of the NHL and the NHLPA. If we're going to terminate the contract, we need to give him a cause notice. We need to give him time to go and clear waivers before we can clear those contracts. Nothing can leak out in any way, shape, or form because we need it to be clean. And we need to go through our processes.
Yeah, and we can't be legally responsible for saying anything speculatory or anything that apart
and they can't come out and go, that's not true. Because the follow-up question is, well, what is true?
Yeah. And I can't tell you what it is legally, but
there was someone else who and they're probably going to be annoyed with me. I don't care. There's someone else, I'm not going to name them, but they're normally a lot smarter than that. Who said, well, if those rumors weren't true, all of those people would be suing. To which I said, you can't just sue the internet.
Yeah, you can't sue every anonymous user on the internet, but you can certainly sue the Blackhawks if they do something out of the ordinary.
No insider, journalist, or anyone with any form of credibility said anything other than that was an absolute lie and utter trash. Yeah, it was a general internet rumor. You can't just sue the ether. So, that's the thing. It was basically, it's impossible to defend. They had to go through their process. I think Corey Perry's statement coming out and going, I'm seeking substance abuse help. I'm going through this, cleared a lot of that up. Kyle Davidson cleared a fair bit of that up by saying it didn't involve any member of the active roster or their families. And then other journalists have started. Emily Kaplan has reported that it was conduct that really became apparent on the trip to Columbus. And I
mean, I'd heard some kind of mention of, I don't know if any of these details have been kind of confirmed or at least kind of made plausible by anyone that, in terms of like how he treated some equipment staff and so forth. I don't know whether that's true or not, but
that was the sort of thing going around is about, the way that equipment staff were being treated in particular.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I can understand, if he was having a difficult time and was taking it out on people in the workplace or whatever, that I think that kind of meets what the kind of suggestions that they're talking about was. But of course, obviously we're never going to get any full details on it and we shouldn't expect to. I think that all we can really kind of hope for is that people's speculation doesn't reflect badly and make it more difficult for innocent people in the scenario. And I think that was the worst thing about these rumors.
And that includes, like, even outside of those rumors, that includes things like if it is someone on the equipment staff that there was an abuse towards or verbal or whatever happens to be mistreatment, like they're an innocent party in all this too. Like this,
that's it. Yeah. They don't deserve to get dragged into this.
No, exactly. And so I think it's one of those things where I think everybody is pretty much of the same opinion. You hear a couple of people go, "Oh, he's a good guy in the locker room." No, I think he's done. He seems to have basically said, I need to go home.
Yeah. I mean, he was more or less in his last kind of ditch run anyway. Like, he was paid significantly more than he would have been paid anywhere else just because they wanted veteran presence in the Chicago locker room anyway and to be over the cap floor. I don't think that there were a lot of other teams lining up to give Corey Perry that contract.
Now, the interesting bit as well about this was just when this story broke, and this is what made me feel like it was possibly substance abuse related before they announced it, was that Scott Darling's interview about the NHLPA's substance abuse program, the clip that he sort of had from that resurfaced at the same time. And that was really interesting that came back at the exact same time that happened. But Scott Darling talked about the idea that you shouldn't use the NHLPA's program because it would be used against you in future negotiations and future dealings with the PA and teams. Yeah. Now, obviously, what needs to be stated is that Scott Darling went through this process when there was a different head of the NHLPA and a different committee of the NHLPA. But it's still a very damning indictment from a player who's used the process of the NHLPA's substance abuse program. His thing was go and get your own help.
Yeah.
Don't use the league. It's just,
Yeah. I mean, look, I think it's difficult because I think that's almost bound to happen to some degree just by the nature of, you know, it being the league's program. Like whether or not people intend to or not, there's kind of inherent biases around, you know, mental health and substance abuse and all that kind of stuff that are going to, you know, if it's public knowledge because it's through the NHL's program, it's probably going to factor into your negotiations, even if people don't say it. You know, that's that difficult thing about, you know, you can regulate and you can say, oh, you can't use this as part of you know, being offered a contract or whatever, but you might just not be offered a contract by someone because they're not interested because that information has become public when it didn't need to be.
Yeah, it's, as I said, the whole thing's a messy thing. The only thing I can say is that I do hope that, you know, Corey Perry is able to get the help he needs, and that, again, the innocent parties that are a party to all of this, both rumor and realistic, are able to sort of move past it all without too many problems. On to some signings. Now, obviously, the big one is Sam Montembeault to a 3-year contract at $3.15 million to the Canadiens at his 28 to 30 seasons. That's a big signing. Ground-changing, earth-shifting.
I mean, look, I do think that they got a fairly kind of decent deal considering the workload that he's expected to have for the Canadiens. You know, he's ostensibly their starting goalie for the next few years because Carey Price is never coming back. So
someone's got to save some pucks.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty decent deal, and honestly, good on Montembeault, who was, you know, more or less a career backup up until relatively recently. It seems to have kind of found a spot to start.
He's a career backup who's taken the trajectory at the moment of all career backups and become the starter for the Habs.
Yeah,
no, of course, I jest. The big contract is Nino Niederreiter, 3 more years at $4 million in Winnipeg. His 32 to 35 year seasons. Those most coveted of seasons.
That's right. Everyone knows the mid-30 seasons are all the best.
Obviously, Winnipeg paying the Winnipeg tax for Nito. But look, I like Nito Niederreiter.
Look, I think he's been a good fit there. I think that's a good player for them.
Giving me some good fantasy points. There's one other, Patrick Kane.
I think I've heard of this guy.
Detroit.
I think that kind of makes sense in terms of like looking at teams where he could have signed. Like, you know, I didn't see a heap of speculation about teams, probably because no one had any cap space.
No.
But like the Red Wings had a little bit of space. I think that they're, you know, kind of in a window where they need to prove that they're trying to, you know, compete and they're actually getting better and so forth. So I can, you know, and they're actually kind of competing relatively well in the Atlantic this so far this season or whatever. Whether or not Patrick Kane actually helps them remains to be unseen at this point. But
I saw of the rumors, I saw that Patrick Kane might go back to the Rangers, as that was something that was legitimate, although they'd have to make the room for him, obviously. There was the always rubbish fact that, you know, that Toronto media decided they wanted to link themselves to him, which was never going to happen because they can't afford to put a peanut butter sandwich on that roster at the moment.
I didn't expect the Rangers thing to happen just because he wasn't good on the Rangers.
Well, that's the other weird part about that. There were a lot of people pushing for him to return to New York, and I'm like, he was terrible.
Oh, yeah, he wasn't good there. I didn't really understand what the point was.
Like, you didn't go far in the playoffs, and Patrick Kane did nothing for you. Absolutely nothing for you. I just feel, I felt like there was only one place he was ever actually going to go.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where he ended up going. So I find that was interesting.
In terms of what he is at this point, though, I guess that's the big question mark. He debuts tomorrow against the Sharks, so he'll probably get 10 points just playing against the Sharks. But
he'll lose. Excuse me, we're hot.
No, they're good now. Yeah, I could have made that joke a month ago, but
you can't do that anymore.
But apparently they're decent now. So look, if he played during those back-to-back games where they let in 10 goals each game or whatever, then that might have goosed his numbers a little bit. But look, it's tricky to see because obviously, Kane the last couple of years, very specifically last year, where before he got the surgery and stuff, obviously wasn't good. He's obviously never been defensively good, but he has at some points in his career been an excellent elite playmaker. But a lot of that's kind of really fallen off. Look, if you look at some of the
if you're watching on video, we put up the chart.
Yeah, if you look at some of the numbers, recently, really, even his counting stats haven't looked great despite opportunity. A big part of, he was still kind of putting up some numbers well on the Blackhawks because who else were they going to roll out on the power play and all those kinds of things. And then on some teams where he's not going to get that opportunity, you're going to see those, even that kind of go down a little. The other factor is to it, is he suddenly back to who he was before, or is he the reality that most people who get this kind of hip resurfacing surgery are just never themselves again after it? The most recent example of that we've seen is Nicholas Backstrom, who did actually make a comeback after that, despite, most people don't. We've just recently seen Carl Hagelin, have that surgery and then retire. Ryan Kessler had that surgery and never played again. Backstrom tried to play but was just a shadow of his former self. It's tough. There's less impactful surgeries that people have come back from, and maybe he'll be the exception. Maybe he'll all of a sudden, this has been bothering him for a couple of years, and he'll be kind of back to doing what he was doing, or he'll find some way to be elite. But the reality is, at this point in his career, in his 30s, on the decline, coming off a surgery that is generally a career killer, I just don't know what to expect from Patrick Kane, and I'm not expecting a lot.
No, I'm not really. I don't understand this one. I get it from as far as I can see that this is something that the Blackhawks would want to, the Red Wings would want to try. Yeah. I get it in terms of Steve Yzerman goes, well, if I can add...
There's a chance, have it.
If I can add an elite scoring talent from previous years who's got experience at winning in playoffs and experience winning, and you get all these teams that make locker room moves, and you bring in the experienced guy.
Then he's going Phil Kessel.
I get that side, except from the fact that I think Phil Kessel has a lot more, and we'll talk about this later. I think Phil Kessel has a lot more hockey in him than Patrick Kane does, really. And that's not because Patrick Kane's not mentally or even physically able to do it in terms of most parts. The shoulder, he can't. The surgery he's had...
Kane had hip surgery.
Hip, sorry, not the shoulder, the hip. The surgery he's had on that hip has a very low strike rate. Incredibly low strike rate. And everyone's, well, what about this player and this player? There's a difference between what he had done and the other hip surgeries that people have had, right? There's been little scrapes, people have had scrapes and things like that, versus the resurfacing. And
it just sounds uncomfortable, if nothing else.
If you have a part of your body that has to be resurfaced, you're probably in a bit of trouble at this point in time. And what you're probably aiming for is walking. Not so much playing high-level elite hockey. So
and I think that there's something different about having this at maybe 25 and then bouncing back versus having this at 35 and bouncing back as well.
I just feel like this is going to end badly. It's I was going to say it's low risk, but it's not even really that low risk because it's $2.75 million this year. Look, I know they've got a bit of cap space in Detroit, but it's still $2.75 million they're taking off the books for a team that could at the deadline be in a position to be adding. And I feel like this also feels a little bit like Stevie Y's making a calculated bid to get a name to try to get other names. So
I suspect that if nothing else, they'll just hope that he maybe can help them on the power play, or maybe he can help in certain situations or whatever to give a little bit of star power to their roster. Because you look up and down their roster, and apart from getting DeBrincat recently or whatever, there's a whole lot of kind of not a lot there. There's a whole lot of kind of middling. So I understand the swing at having a potential elite playmaker in their ranks, but I think that the likelihood that he even lives up to that 1 year 2.75 is probably low.
I look forward to seeing what happens tomorrow after Mario Ferraro flattens him on the first shift.
I mean, this is the thing is though, like if he scores like a goal tomorrow or whatever, and it or has a decent game or something, everyone's just gonna be like, oh, he's back, he's great, he's gonna well, let's see after maybe like a week.
Let's see after you play a real team. We're not a real team. We're streaking, but we're not a real team. Anyway, the salary cap. So we finally got our confirmation on the salary cap going up.
Yes.
By $4.2 million.
I mean, which is good by NHL cap standards, but not what we were promised.
Also, there's a suggestion that the cap will then sit flat at that for a couple of years before going up again. So the NHL has said that it's tied to revenue and it's tied to increases in revenue. This, by the way, at the same time that they loudly announced how much they're spending to get the NHL draft on the Sphere in Vegas.
Yeah.
So we can't afford to raise the salary cap. We can get the draft on the Sphere in Vegas.
Yeah, we can have a 40-foot tall Gary Bettman face, but
that's what we want.
Yeah.
Maybe it could be worse. If Gary's not there, we could end up with a giant Bill Daly head. I mean, the Sphere is the right shape for Bill Daly. Imagine just having a Bill Daly hovering over the top of you, just like.
No, I mean, look, I really think that over the last few years, the NHL have very specifically, compressed and tried to keep the cap as low as possible. And this just kind of reeks of like, well, we can't. Some teams are having real trouble. Like now we've got to give them a bid, and then that'll hold us off for a couple more years, and then we can give them just a little bit more. And we give, I just don't buy that they couldn't increase it more. They just don't want to. So
at the moment, if you look at all the major sports, obviously in the US, first of all, their caps are ridiculous. Second of all, again, the NBA goes with luxury tax. It doesn't even go with a salary cap. So you can spend as far over as you want, and you just pay a luxury tax on the top of it, which means that those players have amazing contracts. And like somebody who never sees the court is going to earn more than Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. Like, just the way it works. What I find really fascinating, though, is like to give you an idea about the league at the moment in hockey-loving Toronto, the so-called mecca of the sport, the cradle and saving grace of the sport. They're talking about baseball because Shohei Ohtani is possibly going to play for the Blue Jays.
Yeah,
but because they've got a cap that's really big, and you can offer a lot of money to players to go play somewhere. And nobody's like, look at what we got to the off season this year for the NHL. And it was plotting sideways moves for a third liner because no one's got any cap.
Yeah.
And
you've got to pull off like 3 different concurrent trades to get, one decent trade in.
William Nylander has been one of the hottest players to the NHL to start the year. And everyone's going, you can't afford to give him a $1.2 million raise, maybe even, or $4 million. We can't offer him all that money. He's putting up numbers like the best player in the league, but you can't offer him anything close to it because, how are you going to afford the third line defenseman?
Yeah, it's real poverty mentality, unfortunately.
Backwards. It's backwards that the Wild, because of previous regimes' cap decisions, have to eat a massive cap hit for buying out contracts that were signed by somebody else completely.
It's not for the best of the product.
And what you could have the Wild do instead is pay that as a fine to the league and put that into some form of other thing going forward for the league.
Yeah, everyone's convinced themselves this is the way it has to be, and it doesn't result in the best product on ice.
Like the NHL salary, to give you an idea of this, first of all, we all know what goes on in history, and the Vancouver Canucks have already spent the $4 million. They haven't traded for anyone yet. They haven't signed anybody yet, but Vancouver's already over the cap by another $4.5 million. So it doesn't really matter anymore. But like at the moment, to give you an idea how stupid is this system, right? How stupid is this system? I'm going to read out the current cap space of the teams that are all in LTIR. Right? The Washington Capitals are currently 7.25 million over the salary cap. The Colorado Avalanche are currently 3.236 over the salary cap. The Vegas Golden Knights are 4.487 over the salary cap.
It's half the league, like literally half the league.
Rangers are 6.5 over the cap.
Yeah.
Everyone's
over.
We are absolutely kidding ourselves.
Even the teams that are barely spending like are not that much under.
The funniest part, by the way, is that technically Tampa is just on zero.
Yeah.
They're over the cap, by the way. They're over the cap. So to give you an idea, the upper limit of the cap this year is 83.5. The first team that is actually under that, I'm going down the list, is the St. Louis Blues. Right? And the St. Louis Blues are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, the 17th highest spending team in the league. The 17th highest spending team in the league is the first one actually under the cap.
Yeah.
Like
that's literally half the league. Literally, 16 out of 32.
Everybody else is over the cap.
And by significant amounts too. Like
Toronto's at 97.
If you took like all of the cap space that the remaining teams have, there's no way that adds up to the amount that everyone else is over.
Toronto has got a projected cap hit of 97 million. Right. St. Louis is the first team under on an 83.218, and that's only just under the cap. Like, it's absolute. New York, Minnesota, Boston, Edmonton, the Islanders, the Flames, the Sens, the Kings, the Penguins, the Canucks, the Caps, the Knights, the Habs, the Lightning, the Avalanche, and the Leafs are all over. All of them are over. But this is why when people go, well, why don't we have trades? And when people start hyping up the idea of, there's going to be a trade for this player, or we could see this superstar go here, or we could see this. No, you can't.
It's not going to happen.
Why is William Nylander? Why are the Leafs happy to hold William Nylander's contract over until the end of the year? He can't go anywhere.
It kills all interesting speculation too, because like you see, like in the NBA or whatever, like superstars getting traded around it all the time, and someone will make like a suggestion of an NHL thing. I'm like, chances are very low. Like,
James Harden wakes up in the morning. James Harden wakes up in the morning, coughs, doesn't quite like the way he coughed, and by that afternoon could be traded to one of 7 teams.
Yeah.
Like Kevin Durant wakes up, his car won't start, and goes, "Well, I need a new car." Well, why don't I just buy a car in a different city?
Yeah.
And moves to that car. Like, it's that stupid. But the NHL,
it's much more entertaining.
Like, it's so much more entertaining trading fourth line centers. You're right, it's great.
Yeah,
spending all that money on a grit guy that does absolutely nothing for you. It's what we do. Look, the NHL will be so good once it actually sorts out what the rules are. But again, we can spend the money on the dome, so it's all good. We're all on the sphere. Everybody's on the sphere. We can put all of those big names on the sphere, like that guy, the one.
Those guys that everyone knows about.
That guy that wears the helmet, and the other guy, he always laughs, and that other dude. Yeah. Like, it's just like when you ask people in the United States largely to name a hockey player, they still all name Wayne Gretzky.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing. And yes, Gretzky's Gretzky, but
this is a guy that retired 24 years ago.
Like, come on, surely somebody else. No, because we can't push anyone. Because the other weird part about this is the other weird thing, and we will get off this in a minute. But I think it's fair at this point we stay on our high horses about the cap. Only in the NHL are players ridiculed for wanting money. In every other league, there's this attitude of people of, no, you go and get the money.
Yeah, and everyone has this idea about he's not worth $9 million.
And remember the whole weird conversation, the Pasternak, I play for the love of the game, not cash.
But it's this anxiety that's created by the artificially low cap as well, because fans wouldn't give a shit about someone getting paid 18 million or whatever if the cap wasn't so restrictive. Like, it's just the reality that they've created this flat cap that barely ever goes up, that everyone starts wringing their hands about, oh, we can't afford to pay that superstar what he's worth. Everyone has to take discounts. Everyone has to, it's like this, the kind of business where everyone is having to take pay cuts is not a successful business.
They've created a business model which penalizes the players for being good.
Yeah.
Like, it punishes players.
If you want to win, you've got to take less. Like,
it punishes.
Can you imagine how many, how happy you would be if you hear that in your workplace of like, we want to, your new contract's up, but we want you to take 20% less so that we can, it'll be better for us. We can all win together or whatever. Like,
like even MLS, like the MLS, like they've got a salary cap. They've got player exemptions on the cap, but they've got a salary cap. But they gave Lionel Messi a percentage of the league. Like, literally, they were so desperate to get Messi to come and play for them that Apple and the MLS gave him a percentage of the MLS. He gets a cut of the profit from the whole league, as well as a salary that doesn't count to the cap, as well as all of these other breaks. I think you also got the David Beckham break of you get a franchise down the line. Whenever we want one, you get one.
Yeah.
Like, MLS doesn't have the income that the NHL has on the surface, but it's turning itself into that profit machine by going out and getting these other names and using them to launch the brand and coming up with really inventive cap ways to sort of get these players into their league and bolster names and bolster numbers and bring more money in to bolster the amount of money you put into the league. The NHL goes, no, why would we want to do that? We don't want to bring.
I think that the NHL is handicapped in some way, that it's probably never going to be quite as popular as basketball or soccer or more kind of like approachable sports that are easier for people to get into. But that doesn't mean that it can't be significantly better than it is. It certainly can do more to improve.
But this is the thing. I think that Gary Bettman has hamstrung the league.
Yeah.
And the way that Bettman has operated the league, and the way that the fact that like the owners are a cartel and Gary is their man, and Gary does what the owners tell Gary to do, and the owners would like more money for them, not for the players, for them. And so they run a league that is restrictive on the players, which means that all of the extra profits that the league makes goes back to the clubs instead and goes back to the owners. So what we've got is a system that is set up that the players go out there and make the money and the owners walk away with the money. And every time the players would like to get a more of a cut of that money, the owners make them humiliate themselves and like give things up to get a little bit more money instead. And it's the most ridiculous set of negotiations you've ever seen. And it's the most ridiculous.
Maybe if you didn't go to the Olympics, we'll give you just a little bit more.
Gary's already started that. Like, they've already started that conversation around the fact that the all of the venues for the Winter Olympics in Italy aren't built yet. It's 2026, but don't mind that. But because they're not all built yet, Gary's already saying, well, we haven't seen the quality of the ice and we don't know what the building's like. And if we don't see that soon, we might have to rethink on behalf of, which is code for, we don't want to send them to the Olympics again. So we're going to come up with a reason to not send them to the Olympics again. It's utterly ridiculous. When you go back and look at the 90s, and you look at when Bettman then took over the league, what you see when Gary Bettman took on the NHL was in a fairly good spot. Like, it was a fairly well-regarded, it was one of the major leagues, and it was a very major league. Look what happened when the Rangers won the Cup. They shut down New York. Shut down New York. That parade, for whatever you want to say, in 94, that parade stopped New York dead. Right? And it was a big deal. And I think that they very quickly made themselves niche. And like, this is not something where they look back and go, I don't quite know how this happened. No, I know how this happened. This happened because you're narrow-minded, small, and short-sighted and wanted to keep the profits for yourself and wanted to make sure that players couldn't get paid exponentially, and therefore players don't have a profile. You're trying to sell players that are earning less than the average bench rotation spot person in the NBA as superstars. Doesn't work.
No.
So anyway, the cap's going up a little bit, and then it's going to sit again, and we're not going anywhere else after that. And yay, league! The other big thing that happened while you're away is obviously the Oilers sacked Jay Woodcroft because somebody needed to get fired, and you really couldn't sack everybody else in the team. Now look, Chris Knobloch came in largely because there's a bunch of reasons. There's no one can put their finger on one reason or another as to why Chris Knobloch came in, Connor's junior coach. And no one's quite sure why Knobloch was picked best friends with the general manager. And it's just, I don't know why all of this. Yeah, I don't know why all of this happened. Yeah, look.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously the Oilers started the season pretty terribly. They, significantly underperformed their expectations, and something was gonna happen regardless. But
they've been better, but they're still trash.
Yeah, that's I don't know if they're really going to totally get to the point where people were kind of expecting them to be at. They've dug themselves a pretty decent hole. They're still under 500, and they're going to have to be very good the rest of the season.
They're going to be perfect.
Yeah, pretty much. They're below Anaheim. That really tells you all you need to know.
And I still think that it's one of those things where, and I know that people go, well, they've played less games than everybody else. Yes, but some of the games they've lost are the teams they should have thumped. And they San Jose got to do one of the funniest things ever. But that's beside the point. We'll come back to that in a minute. But I think, look, the Oilers still don't have a goalie. They still don't have a goalie. McDavid sort of remembered where the net is, and they've started. McDavid and Draisaitl have started to work it out a little bit. But they still don't have defense. They still don't have a goalie. The problems aren't gone. They're still there.
Yeah, it was really just that they, we saw what they look like when McDavid and Draisaitl aren't playing up to their league breaking level for a few weeks. That's pretty much it. You got a glimpse of what the rest of the team actually is.
Yeah, you got a glimpse of what the Oilers are, and then you get to see what McDavid and Draisaitl are when they're on, and that's what's largely happened. Also, just very briefly, Milan Lucic is currently on indefinite leave of absence from the Bruins. He was arrested after an alleged domestic incident. Obviously not a good look. And, again, not much more to be said about that. The Bruins handled that really well too. They were very quick to move that one on. Also, I will praise the Bruins again though. Did you see the Bruins Pride Night the other night?
I saw they had the steps and stuff outside.
Yeah. So the Bruins Pride Night, they did the whole, you can't. This will lead in nicely into the last thing we're going to talk about before we get into what's more likely. They did, you can't wear this, you can't do this. You can now tape your sticks again. They've allowed you to do that, but you can't wear any special jerseys or anything on the ice. You can't do that. So they just made TD Garden into a rainbow. Basically, They made the stairs, they made the outside. It was bright. It was all the screens around the building. The whole thing was very much lit up for Pride. And again, I always struggle because I'm not a massive fan of the Bruins overall as an organization. But in terms of some ways, but in other ways, especially with things like the LGBT stuff, and that they've been absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, there's a few teams that I think really do a great job of it. They actually go above and beyond and don't just kind of put in a token effort. Especially, I think that's special in the NHL this year where, they've really kind of taken a step back. I will say before we kind of get on to that topic and the next thing though, I did hear just yesterday from a friend of mine who's involved. Guest of the podcast, Kate, who's been on before with Proud to Play and that kind of thing. They have been given rights or approval to use the NHL Pride Shield on the Mardi Gras float this year, which is really cool. Apparently, no one has ever been outside the NHL has been given access to that before. So hopefully that's a good turning point, a good stepping stone in the right direction for the NHL.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely awesome. So yeah, look out for that. So leading into all of that is then Marc-Andre Fleury, who had a mask commissioned with Native American artwork for the Native American Heritage Night. I believe it was linked to his wife as well, who is Native American.
Yeah.
And it was the commissioned artist, all those sorts of things. And so he had the mask.
Canadian, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he's North American. Yes. But so Native American Heritage Night was told by the NHL that he was not allowed to wear the mask. Now, basically, he wore it and went, "Go on,
Yeah, go on, find me.
I dare you." And the other funny part was every single NHL writer basically got onto Twitter and went, "Go on, do it,
Yeah,
do it. We want to see you try."
Yeah, give it a shot. No, of
They
course not.
absolutely didn't.
It's been a nice theme this year of the NHL making stupid decisions and players just going, go on then, show how stupid you are with this, and then the NHL chickening out. We saw the same kind of thing with pride tape stuff, and it's disappointing, but at least it's nice to see the players go, making an obvious statement of saying, no, this is wrong.
My favorite part of all of this too was when they auctioned it off afterwards for charity. Alan Walsh posted the results of the thing, $35,100 raised for charity. And awesome. He hashtagged it. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
So you can clearly tell what Alan Walsh thought about that. Well, I wanted to get a picture of like Gary Bettman with like a sword through him, like that.
Yeah.
Alan's good at the Photoshop. I wanted to see it. We missed
it's just, I mean, look, it's nice to see these couple of kind of successes with this, but I do wonder how many people have been told no by the NHL and it's just gone nowhere from that. Like, apparently Logan Thompson wanted to put a cancer ribbon on his helmet for, during Hockey Fights Cancer Month, and was told that he couldn't do it by the NHL, and I don't believe that he ended up doing it. So I wonder, how many positive, things that we've seen not happen because of the NHL and people not fighting them on it.
This goes back to what I said before in terms of look at the other leagues. Now look at the NHL. And everybody looks at the NHL leadership and thinks it's a clown show. And like, I don't think you'll find many people high up in sports, media, management, anywhere that have a great opinion of Gary Bettman as a commissioner. He's not very well regarded outside of hockey. The hockey owners love him, but that's because he's making them money. But look a bit broader around the sports world, and the NHL's treated like an absolute joke because that's how they act. So we're going to play one of our favorite games, which is What's More Likely. Now, this is not at all inspired by the fact that the Around the NFL podcast did that this week. Not at all. It's a completely and just of my own volition I did this. Actually, the part of the reason for doing this is that it's a good way to get to a lot of hot topic issues without sitting there and talking about hot topic issues. So the first one
for a long time,
is what's more likely? Ovi beats Gretzky and Gretzky's record, or Connor McDavid wins a cup.
So it's I think it's gotten like murkier recently, because up until last year, like Ovi seemed like on a better pace than we were expecting. We've been talking about it for a couple of years. It's been on the radar for a little while, and we kind of broke down the numbers a little bit on the pod a couple of years back, being like he has to basically have like 30 plus average season or whatever for the rest of his career, maybe until like he's like 42 or something. But he had a couple of years where he got 40 or 50 goals or whatever, and that's kind of brought that average down a little bit. But right now he's 68 off catching Gretzky, but he's only got 5 goals this year in 22 games. He's currently shooting about 6%, which is very low for him. He usually converts on about 15, 18%. He's a volume shooter. He's not necessarily he sometimes puts up 10 shots a game, but he scores on a lot of those. But right now he's not scoring. Like if he stays on the current pace, then he's only going to score 20 this year, which is good for a 38-year-old. But how many more years can he do that at that pace? Like if he did that, he would need to play until he's like 42, scoring 20 a year or whatever. I don't know how realistic that is. It's starting to get a bit dicey.
This is a hard one. Like I've deliberately set all of these with things that are tricky, because you don't want to make it too easy. I'm going to go McDavid wins a cup. And everybody knows what I think of the Oilers, so that's an interesting take from me. But I reckon he'll win a cup after 2026, 2027 in his next destination, which will not be Edmonton.
Yeah, I think likely to, because if you think about it realistically, like Ovi can probably play realistically in the NHL for maybe 2-3 more years. Like that's probably the limit of it before he is like, barely, being dragged around on an NHL team. McDavid still has, 10 more good years or whatever in the NHL.
If McDavid doesn't really genuinely sniff a cup in the next couple of seasons, he's not re-signing in Edmonton. There is
so how long's he got? I think he's got 2 years, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years after this one. So by his age 29 season, he could be on another team. And then he could, theoretically play until he's, Ovi's age, 38.
I'm not saying that the Oilers are going to win a cup. I think McDavid will win a cup, but I don't think Gretzky will catch. I don't think Ovi will catch Gretzky.
Yeah, I think if I had to pick between the two, I think I'll lean on McDavid on that one.
Yeah, and it hurts me because I want.
I really do want both to happen. Realistically, I think it would be a shame if both didn't happen. But I don't know. Like we're starting to see some signs of question marks.
Yeah, and I think Ovi's starting to look at it too a little bit and go, I don't know.
Yeah, can I keep doing this?
So number 2, what's more likely? Toronto wins the Atlantic Division, or Sheldon Keefe gets fired?
I think it's more likely Sheldon Keefe gets fired for sure.
Yep.
Like
the Atlantic's weird. So the Atlantic's weird because how are Boston doing what Boston are doing? Nobody knows.
Again, are they going to win the fucking President's Trophy again after all of their good players retire?
My question remains: is anybody in this league actually a good team?
I don't think so.
I don't think that. I genuinely. And Boston fans are going to get shitty with me, and Rangers fans are probably going to get shitty with me. I don't care. Nobody's good.
No one has stood out as being.
Everyone's a bit middling right now, and like the goal difference, for example, Boston is running away with the Atlantic Division, and their goal difference is 22.
Yeah,
like it's not. I just struggle to think that any team in this league. There's no great teams. There's not a great team among them. There's not a great team among them.
No, definitely. I mean, especially like you look at the Metro and like the Penguins have been very met this year. They can't score for shit on the power play and they've been whatever. But they're currently 7th in the Metro, but they're 4 points behind being second. Like it's so flat that
stupid.
They could win 2 games and be second in the division.
So this is my thing. So like it's not the thing for me. The other thing for me with Toronto is like regular season, they're winning their wins in terms of winning games in regulation. Like Toronto can't win games in regulation at this point in time.
No.
They are absolutely terrible in regulation time. Like they're good in the shootout. They're good in winning in overtime. But their absolute record this year is ridiculous. So it's not what you would anticipate a winning team to be. I think Sheldon Keefe's on a bit of borrowed time anyway, because I don't think they necessarily wanted to keep Keefe around. It felt to me like Keefe was kept because you weren't going to throw everybody out.
Yeah, I think that was to keep them like a bullet, like basically so that if something needs to change, they can sacrifice Keefe.
Now there was that story that happened the article I sent you the link this morning where it was the yesterday at practice. Apparently Sheldon Keefe had yelled out about it being an absolute horseshit practice. And everyone's like, good, he's finally allowed to be the bad guy and he's finally allowed to do that and he's finally allowed to be the bad guy. Apparently then John Tavares and him had a bit of a conversation about the outburst and talked about ways that they could approach the games in the future. And one of the themes that seems to be more and more and more common when you look at what's happening in Toronto is that Keefe hasn't been allowed to basically criticize the roster. And I think he's going to be gone. I think they might get rid of him right around trade deadline time, if they're sitting in the mid pack, like they'll make the playoffs, but they might look to make a change behind the bench and move him out.
Yeah, I mean, it probably only takes I think, coach firing sometimes can just be like a process of some teams, want to have someone lined up behind the scenes already, ready to go, especially if they don't like their in-house solution. And, you can be a kind of dead man walking for a couple of weeks because of that. Or alternatively, you have 3 bad losses in a row or something, and all of a sudden that's it, like that day they're out. Like it's sometimes
they've got a fairly softball run coming up for the next month. Like there's only a couple of games in there. The Hurricanes on the 31st of December. They got the Kings on the 3rd of January. They play the Rangers twice. But outside of that, they're all very winnable games between now and mid-January. So you feel like if Toronto doesn't run the table, that's possibly the end of Keefe.
Yeah.
Because they should be running the table at this point in time. What's more likely? Steven Stamkos re-signs in Tampa or William Nylander re-signs in Toronto?
I mean, I think it's Nylander. I don't know. I think that the Lightning are in an interesting spot because they're one of those teams in terms of them and Washington and Pittsburgh and so forth, old cup winners who are, at the end of their cause kind of, run. Maybe they're not quite as old as the other two, but I'm struggling to see how in a year, next year or whatever, unless they can really convince him that he wants to end his career there or whatever, he couldn't take his services to some other team with suddenly open cap space and feel like he's in a better spot to win.
I'm kind of wondering if there's not, and this goes back to the biggest problem in this being what we talked about before, the cap. I'm kind of even wondering if there's not a potential for Tampa to possibly even move him at the deadline to a team that thinks that they're a Steven Stamkos away from winning.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if they drop off a little bit more.
Yeah, if you get a 1 year rental on a half a year rental on a Stamkos. And it gives you a chance to have a look under the hood, see what's there, see if he thinks you're a fit, see if you think you can make that work.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there's a team that's trying to, I wonder whether or not there's a team out there that needs some center depth. I don't know how Boston or someone would make the cap work, but there's definitely teams out there I think that are a bit suspect, from a center perspective. Maybe it's another Detroit move. Maybe it's another.
That would make perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
that makes more sense than Patrick Kane.
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like he's going to end up in Detroit anyway at the end of the year. I feel like his free agent signing will be Detroit. So, but I that will be interesting. Look, I think it's probably the same. It's probably the same thing as well. I think that I'm starting more and more to lean along the lines of if somebody goes in Toronto for cap space, that it's Marner. I'm getting more and more and more down that path every day because you can't move Tavares. You won't move Matthews.
Much as you would like to.
You won't move Matthews because you're not an idiot. Yeah. I feel like it's Marner. I think Nylander is proving that he can do enough different things for Toronto when needed. And you can possibly, not saying Marner's not great before anyone gets on me, no, he is. But I feel like you can replace what Marner does. Whereas I think Nylander does so many different things within that roster and has been so flexible within that roster that he gives them more options.
Yeah, and I think ideally they'd like to keep Marner, but something's got to give at some point.
At some point, I think if something gives, I think it's Marner. So I think that Nylander resigns. Okay, what's more likely? San Jose gets first pick overall, or the San Jose Sharks make the playoffs? Now, now this is purely because I need to gloat because I had to sit here and I had to cop to double-digit defeats.
Yeah.
And I had someone in the group yesterday after I posted my, guess what, you just lost to Mike Greer's San Jose Sharks meme. And I had someone in the group who told me it's no longer funny now that they're no longer the worst team in the league. No, you're right. They're the second worst team in the league. Much better. No, it was perfectly justified after coming back against the Islanders 4-1 down and seeing a hurdle hat trick plus a William Eklund overtime winner with 7 seconds left.
I mean, look, they still have more regulation wins than Toronto and,
yes, they do.
Montreal. So
Yep, we certainly do. And look, obviously, San Jose is going to be rubbish. We're still going to get probably a top 3 pick. I still think we're going to get first overall. Yeah. We've had this winning streak, and we're still only like 1 point above the worst team in the league. Look, we're watchable though, and that's all we've ever asked for. We are watchable, and it's giving good experience to some of these players. And the smart move they made was when we were in the midst of the really bad losing, they got a couple of these players and sent them to the Barracuda and got them away from the team. And then as the team started to perform, they've gradually started bringing the young ones back again. So, like, I'm going to give Mike Greer some credit. There's been some good management going on here of, all right, we want to get them experience, but we don't want them to just get cleaned every game. The other thing that's been really good for San Jose on this is they've got a tradable asset that I don't think they expected to be this useful at the start of the year in Mackenzie Blackwood. Mackenzie Blackwood's going to fetch something, and not something small. He has been in a team that was rubbish. He's been amazing. Mackenzie Blackwood's performances this season have been unreal. And so, like, San Jose will move him at the deadline and they will get something big for him because he's proven that he can do it.
I think it's tricky, though, realistically, to move a goalie at the deadline for, like, a significant return because the reality is that, like, contenders who are trading for goalies are usually just trading for a backup. Like, no one's trading for a starter usually. Like
Edmonton.
I mean, look, it's possible. I will say that there are certainly teams where he could compete for a starting job or whatever. But I think usually you've done that earlier.
Look, the other thing is too, the Sharks are a team that could take the Campbell contract.
That's true. Yeah.
What they would be demanding a pretty good draft pick for that one.
Yeah, but I think that would be a good fit, and I think that would work out well.
I think the move, like, legitimately, and this is not just me trying to talk it into existence. I legitimately think the move is that San Jose goes Jack Campbell and a really, really, really good package of picks or a great pick for Mackenzie Blackwood. And I think that's probably the right move. And I think it's the right move for all parties.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one. That makes a lot of sense.
All right. Now I've got that out of the way. I wanted to give Brendon a chance to talk about his Penguins. So what's more likely? Sidney Crosby wins a cup before he retires? Or
I assume you mean another cup because he does have 3.
I'll stop talking about it. Sidney Crosby wins another cup before he retires, or Evgeny Malkin plays for another NHL team.
I think there's a certain scenario that has to happen for Malkin to be able to play for another team realistically. And I think Crosby has 2 years left in his contract and Malkin has 3. If Crosby decided to retire at the end of this contract, then in that last year, I could see a possibility of them going, okay, we're rebuilding, we'll trade away, everything that's left on this team or whatever. And then Malkin would probably want to go, 1 year to another contender and try and win another cup in his last year of his contract. But, he would be 39 at that point. But, I don't know. I mean, look, I think that both of them are obviously relatively unlikely, but I think that that's probably the more likely potential scenario is that Malkin decides he wants to play a little bit longer and the Penguins are already in a rebuild and he gets moved for like a short period of time. I really hope it doesn't happen. I want all of them to retire as Penguins, and I think there's a very high chance that happen. But it's hard to bet against the
Marlon and Thornton retire as Sharks, and
Yeah, but that's the thing. I know the reality is that it'll get down to if they're not competitive, it will get down to the point where they might have to rebuild before they will retire. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to bet against the field in terms of like, this Penguins team winning another cup or any other team in the next 3 years or whatever. Like, I've got to say that the odds of the Penguins being the one that wins in the next 3 years is very low compared to everyone else, the field. So I'll go the Malkin option in that regard.
Yeah, I've kind of got the Malkin option as well. I'm not ruling Crosby out. I mean, part of that is too, like, it's trying to work out what the Penguins are at the moment is interesting. I didn't hate the moves that Dubas made in the offseason. I thought they were good.
Yeah.
I don't know what's been going on, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously their power play's been bad for a long time, but it's been historically bad this year. Like, literally, they've just had 31 power plays in a row without a goal. So that's a big element to it. Like, you look at today's game against Tampa. Tampa scored on their 2 power play chances. The Penguins didn't score on their 3 or something. They just look completely listless and pointless out there. They don't have any kind of dangerous looks or anything on that. And they just haven't found a way to fix that. They've had some injuries and they've had a bunch of new players and stuff, and things haven't totally clicked. Like, at times I think there's been good elements of it, but they're just not doing things the right way. And I think that there's a good chance that like a coaching change or something could turn all this around, a couple of minor moves and a coaching change or something. I just kind of have suspected for the last couple of years that as good as Mike Sullivan is, that it's just no longer working.
So we just wait. So we just wait for the Toronto Maple Leafs to sack Sheldon Keefe.
And I mean, look, it's possible. Yeah, it could be.
Kyle brings him over, and
that could be it. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one because I think that all of those core pieces are still good and have still been good. Like, none of them are.
That's what I can't.
Badly.
That's what, from an outside perspective, that's what I've been trying to work out. I don't think the pieces are bad.
No, and they improved on the depth, but it's just hasn't really worked out. No,
and like the goal, what's been going on with the goaltending? That's been the other.
It's kind of weird because like Jari has like almost led the league in shutouts, but has also been like kind of bad in some games as well. But he hasn't had a heap of help either, which has been a weird one. Yeah, I don't know. It's been inconsistent at times. At times he's saved them, but at times he's been pretty average. It should have been enough, but like there's just been a bunch of small things which altogether have added up to them being pretty average.
Yep, fair. The last one. What's more likely? Patrick Kane scores over 15 goals this season, or Phil Kessel scores 1?
So I guess obviously the question is, does Phil Kessel get another NHL?
Phil Kessel has been doing the rounds. He's been making the tours. He's been going around. I think it was mentioned on the most recent CJ show, I think, talked about the fact that Phil Kessel's meeting with teams. Friedman and that have been talking about the fact that Phil Kessel has made it very apparent to everybody in the league he is ready to play.
I'd love to see Phil Kessel back. I don't think it'll happen while Mike Sullivan's there because it seems like that relationship broke down. Maybe they fire Mike Sullivan, they bring in a new coach, and then they get Phil Kessel back in there and he saves their power play, because honestly their power play has not been good since Phil left the team.
I think the answer to this one is that Phil Kessel scores 1. I think Phil Kessel will get 1 goal. I think
that's very likely.
15.
No, I think that's what I would go with as well. Like, I think the likelihood that, Kane probably has some success. He probably, plays the next 60 games or whatever and gets maybe 10 goals or something like that or whatever, a smattering of points, 15 to 20 points or something. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's likely that Phil kind of, maybe finds like a last minute, depth role or something like that and pots one. But I'm curious about why he hasn't got a contract already. Like, there's plenty of, I guess there's probably a bunch of guys that have been cut out because of the cap crunch, and maybe that's the reality of it. But surely one of these teams could have had, would have been better to have Kessel.
I'm staggered that nobody went, why don't we just add Phil for some depth?
Yeah, it's weird. There's plenty of teams which have cap space and some pretty suspect depth.
I'm The weird one for me that would have actually made sense because they've got the cap space to do it and they've got roster gaps and they've been a bit meh and could probably do with it is Seattle.
Yeah.
Like Seattle's got roster spots and they've got cap. So they could do it. They are one of the teams that could do it, and they are a team that's in a playoff.
I don't think that Phil Kessel plays the way that Seattle wants to play. Like
the other team, by the way, is Carolina.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing. I think Carolina maybe could like fit him in a particular role in a easier way. I think that might be a better stylistic fit.
Both of those teams, I feel like, are teams that I know cap wise they could do that move. Roster wise, they could do that move. Look, you could actually turn.
It would be fun. Look, I want to see the return of like Phil Kessel to Boston. That'd be interesting.
I want to see Phil Kessel in Arizona actually playing.
Well, he played there for a while and
I know.
Wasn't good there.
No, I know, but now when they're decent, and like, can you imagine Phil Kessel on a university campus? Like Phil Kessel on a college campus with access to a golf course.
Yeah,
like it's insane. Also, just before we go, the last thing is we'll keep your ears peeled. Apparently, there will be some announcement this week relating to Arizona and a plot of land for a rink. So it sounds like they are about to actually announce that they've got something. Nice. So keep your ears open for that. But the Coyotes might finally have a home that doesn't involve having to wait for classes to not be on. So that'll do us for this episode. Next episode is the big 200.
Yeah.
We'll do something, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll work it out.
We'll plot something. I don't know what it'll be. Until then, thank you everyone for your feedback. Thanks everyone for the feedback too on the Leah Merrill episode. Really appreciate the fact that people seem to really enjoy that. And we're continuing to try to get some more guests on as well with us. So keep listening out for that too. But we'll catch you all later.
Thanks, guys. See ya.